Josh, do you support some kind of mandatory cooling off period for injured players before returning to the game, or is that something it's just a reality of the sport in this era?
You know what's crazy is the officials wanted that tonight. I thought that was pretty comical that they came up and said that to me.
That feeling of tomorrow morning and you're University of Arkansas and you're in our state, Arkansas, and you're proud of the Razorbacks, that's what I felt whenever, they were giving KJ his trophy and the team ours, and to be Outback Bowl champions with 9 wins. I'm really, really proud of our team with what we've accomplished. 2 of the teams that beat us also were pretty good last night, so we play in a heck of a league, and I'm proud to be, and I said it a long time ago, we're in the SEC West right where Arkansas belongs, and we're starting to prove that.
I mean, the anticipation of the mayo bath, and then I got hammered in the back of the head by the cooler before they dumped it on me, so I may have a concussion from that, and then on top of that I got the mayo, and it was awful, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm so glad I got to experience it because we won, but it was even more awful than I thought it would be, to be honest with you. I mean, these pants and I changed shirts, but it's I mean, I got mayo in my pockets, and I'll be getting mayo off of me for months.
Oh, welcome in to the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Mike Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter. And man, we got a great show lined up today. We got 2 guests on the line. We've got the great Tony Basilio. Everybody knows that name. Knoxville radio host, TonyBasilio.com. He's on the FM. He's on the AM. He's had one of the best radio shows not only in the Knoxville market, but across the SEC for years and years and years. So he's going to be joining the show to talk a little Tennessee football. We got Ben Portnoy of the state newspaper out of Columbia, talk a little South Carolina football. So, hey, loaded show here. That's what I'm trying to do. If Cousin Shane can't be on the show, load us up with some guests so it's not just me sitting here spieling. But before we get to those 2 interviews, I love to talk on all 14 SEC teams if we can. And I got a great way to do it here because we've already shifted gears to the 2022 season, and we have got odds to win the national championship courtesy of Bet Online for all 14 SEC teams. So let's start right at the top. No surprise here. They're always going to be in the running as long as old Nick Saban's down there. Alabama has the best odds right now among SEC teams to win the national title next season with 3-1. And you got to love those odds. If you're an Alabama fan, you got Bryce Young coming back, the Heisman Trophy winner, Will Anderson, who's getting some love as the best defensive player. Some people say the best overall player in the country. Now, you've, of course, had a couple of guys hit the portal. There's going to be major NFL decisions that have to be made across this roster, but you bring in an Eli Ricks, transfer from LSU, one of the top cornerbacks in the SEC, switching gears from the Tigers to the Tide. You're bringing in Jahmyr Gibbs, 3rd in the country all-purpose yards, to take up that slack at the running back position. I mean, Alabama, let's not kid ourselves. They're going to be loaded next season, so no surprise. Betting favorite, 3-1, Alabama Crimson Tide. But right behind them, again, no surprise, the Georgia Bulldogs, 3.5-1 to be a defending national champion. And how great does that sound if you're a Bulldog, right? You waited years and years and years to be a national champion. Now you got great odds to be defending national champions 2 years in a row. Something I believe Nick Saban's only done once. Hey, I'm just saying, Kirby's, you got the ability to match him here in 2022. And I believe Ohio State, I'm not looking at the odds, only got the SEC right here, but Ohio State's right there in the mix. Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. Those are your 3 favorites to win the national title next season. So Alabama, Georgia fans, gotta love to hear that. Now we got a little bit of a drop-off here, but at 16-1, the Texas A&M Aggies, with all this talent that Jimbo Fisher and company has managed to corral down there in College Station, 3rd best odds in the SEC right now to win the national title, according to Bet Online. So you're assuming, we're going to get the team we got in 2020, a little closer than 2021, of course. Many tight ball games didn't go your way. Maybe that flips the other way, but hey, I think Aggies will take out right now third best odds in the SEC to go on and win the national championship next season. Now, we've got 4 teams here. This is a significant drop-off between Alabama, Georgia, and A&M, but we've got 4 teams here with all the same odds, 66 to 1 to win the national championship. We got Arkansas, Auburn, Florida, LSU, and that's interesting because we got a mix of 2 first-year coaches, Billy Napier in Gainesville, Brian Kelly in Baton Rouge, and then we've got Sam Pittman and company coming off the best season in 10 years there in Fayetteville. How great does that sound? You're right there, 4th best odds to win the national championship, when even last season you didn't have the best 4th best odds to win the SEC West. That's how quickly Sam Pittman and company have turned this thing around. You got KJ Jefferson returning. Tough schedule again, but hey, they say that every year about the Razorbacks, and they continue to prove their doubters wrong. So, not stunning. That's not stunning to me at all. 66 to 1 Arkansas Razorbacks. The one it is surprising, Auburn Tigers 66 to 1. Same odds as Arkansas. I know Auburn won last year, but a lot of turnover there on that offensive side of the ball. Bo Nix, Kobe Hudson off. You do get Tank Bigsby, of course, is back. So, hey, you may have the best running back in the SEC. You got a hell of a defensive coordinator that, did a pretty good job in year 1. So going through this rugged SEC West, that's going to be a chore for the Auburn Tigers. So I'm not quite buying 66 to 1 for them. And same thing, I think, with Florida and LSU with first-year coaches. To have the 4th best odds I think they're basing that off your talent. And I think even Florida fans would tell you the talent's dipped a little since Dan Mullen's been there. LSU, the talent's not dipped. They've racked up incredible recruiting classes under Coach O, but a lot of those players are gone via the transfer portal. Some are off to the NFL. LSU makes some sense. Brian Kelly's got that championship pedigree. But again, I'm not sitting here saying I like Florida and LSU to compete for the national title, but I guess I get it more than anything else based on the program prestige, the coaches they got coming in, championship caliber, and I know obviously Louisiana and Notre Dame, 2 different programs, but hell, Billy Napier's been in that Sun Belt championship game, 3 years in a row. Brian Kelly has Notre Dame annually in the college football playoff discussion, so LSU, Florida getting some love there at 66 to 1. Now here's what I really like, and there's 2 teams here again with the same odds, Kentucky and Ole Miss, 80 to 1. I actually love both these odds for both these programs. It's hard to know what to make of Ole Miss right now because we don't know who the quarterback's going to be. Anticipate, it sounds like Jackson Dart, the Southern California quarterback, going to take a visit. Could that be Lane Kiffin's guy? Was playing for the Trojans next season. They just landed Zach Evans. They're landing players on the defensive side of the ball left and right via the transfer portal. So Ole Miss ain't going anywhere as long as Lane Kiffin's there. I got confidence in him. But 80 to 1, now we're getting down to some value bets here. In Kentucky, hell, people still fighting my mentions. 3 days later, I got them number 3 in the SEC heading into the offseason. So I love 80 to 1 odds to win the national championship. This should be the best Kentucky team Mark Stoops has ever had. I'm basing it on the line of scrimmage depth, the depth across the board, some of that star power they've got coming back like Chris Rodriguez, Will Levis, and the entire linebacking core. I mean, Kentucky's going to be trouble for a lot of teams next season. So 80 to 1 for both Ole Miss and Kentucky. I love those odds. Now, again, we got 2 teams here. I kind of like these odds, not as much as Kentucky and Ole Miss, but not far behind either. Tennessee, South Carolina, both with the same odds, 100 to 1 to win the national championship. So much momentum with both of these programs. It's interesting. They kind of mirror each other. Now South Carolina's got their transfer quarterback, where obviously Tennessee got Hendon Hooker this time last year, and they've taken off. So much firepower returning for the Vols. Got to get that defense up to snuff, though, if they're going to be seriously contending for a national championship. And I think it's the flip side for South Carolina. Much stronger defense. Got to get this offense going. But that's what they really attacked with the transfer portal, with Spencer Rattler, Austin Stogner, the Wake Forest running back, a couple others. So that's something we're going to talk with Ben Portnoy here in just a moment. But hey, Tennessee, South Carolina, if you want to take a flyer on either one of them, 100-1. One thing that both could potentially have that you need to win a college football playoff is elite quarterback play. And I'm sitting here talking in myself, the Vols and the Gamecocks, 100-1, not bad. Now, how about this? Mississippi State, all the way down the list. I don't know. I don't get this one. 200-1. So much luster off their season gone after losing the Egg Bowl, losing the bowl game, but really that doesn't mean much for the upcoming season. And I think this should be Mike Leach's best team there at Mississippi State. They went on the road, won some big games, including Texas A&M, beat Auburn on the Plains. I mean, you cannot overlook the fact that things are starting to click for the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Year 3 of Mike Leach. Let's see what they come up with on the defensive side of the ball. Got to get a little bit better. They were better year 1 than they were year 2. We need that thing to flip around. We need the offense to continue to progress. We need this offensive line to come together. But Mike Leach, he takes these receivers and makes them into gold. I think he'll do that again. They've got 2 talented running backs, and I love Will Rogers. I know I basically was saying all season I'd rather have Matt Corral. Well, he's gone. So I'd rather have Will Rogers than whoever they got in Oxford right now, because they don't got one right now. So 200-1, I'm shaking my head at that. That's too low for Mississippi State. Now Missouri, 300-1. I could kind of get that because, again, losing Tyler Beatty, don't know who the quarterback's going to be, even though you've got some nice options. Defense was average at best, sometimes a disaster with Steve Wilkes. So they need to take a huge step forward. I just don't think Missouri's got the line of scrimmage to win a national championship. I mean, I'm just being honest here. And then, of course, Vanderbilt, 500-1. That's probably worth $5 down in Vegas if you want to take a push. Yeah, come on. Vanderbilt, you're not going to win the national championship. That shouldn't be your goal. But those are your odds for the Commodores, 500-1 to win the national championship as of January 12th here, according to Bet Online. But all right, we're going to get this thing moving because, like I said, we got 2 outstanding interviews, not just for the fans of these teams. I tried to hit on a couple different teams with Tony Basilio, and Ben's going to provide some outstanding insight into the transfers that South Carolina landed here in recent weeks. So let's kick it off first with my man, Tony Basilio. This is a great interview. All right, we're pleased to be joined by the legendary Tony Basilio, one of the best out there, not only in the SEC, but the go-to man there for Tennessee and Tennessee athletics. TonyBasilio.com, 99.7 FM, 1040 AM, weekdays 11 to 1. Tony, thank you very, very much for joining the show.
Oh, Mike, it's a real honor, and it's always great to talk to you, so it's a real honor to reciprocate.
Yeah, well, like I was saying right before we started recording here, man, every time we have you on the show, people love it. My dad, I don't think he's ever been as proud of me as when I got Tony Basilio on the show. He's been a long time follower of yours as well, so as have we all. So, man, you're the go-to guy when talking Tennessee football, like I said. So, I really wanted to ask you this because I think the thing that makes you stand out, what makes you unique, is these post-game shows you do where you go all hours into the night.
Yeah.
So what game this year resulted in the longest post-game show for Tony Basilio?
Well, let's look back at that. Guy, you know what? I don't know. Okay. First game of the year, we went all night.
And that was a Thursday
night enough?
Game, right?
We went. Yeah, so that game started at 8, and so we were on from 11 to 11 the next morning. I wasn't in there the full 12 hours. We kind of shifted that, but I think I did the first 5.5.
Yeah. Oh man.
I think I went to bed at 4:30 in the morning, something to that effect.
Yeah, and I mean it's great for Tennessee fans. It's great for the opposing fans because if Tennessee loses, they love tuning in and just seeing all these Vols crying and Tony telling it like it is. But that's another thing that I love about you, Tony. You don't sugarcoat anything. You tell it like you see it, like you hear it. And that's another reason I really wanted to ask you this. What grade do you give Josh Heupel for his first season, which had a lot of highs, but some lows as well?
I just think from where they came from, it's funny you'd mention that. I've been meaning to do a letter grade day on him on my show, which I guess we never really even got into because there's so much other stuff going on with this transfer, the portal, and this NIL stuff, and just all the talk around the league and the playoff talk and everything else. So, thinking out loud here, I'd have to say I'd give him a solid B plus. To get an A, you'd have to beat somebody you weren't supposed to beat. So, but I think a B plus probably a pretty fair grade. And about those post game shows that I do, one of the things that really baffles me, and you talk to you from all over the league, is the way these games are undercovered post game wise. I've always found that very interesting that more people aren't doing what I'm doing all across this league. And one of the things that we try to do after these games is kind of celebrate both sides. Like the older I get, the more I appreciate the fact that there's just so much passion across the league, and the fact that without another passionate fan base, without another team suiting up, we're playing hoopties every week. And that's no fun. When you get to these hoopty games, when you're in the Southeastern Conference, you step out of the league, it just makes it a lot more fun when you get, and only in the Southeastern Conference do you get as many signature games as you get on any given schedule. And it's up to Tennessee now to rise to the level to become a signature opponent on somebody's schedule. And I think they're heading back in that direction.
And do you think there's pressure on the Vols to make that sooner than later? Because, of course, we don't know when officially, but we got Texas and Oklahoma coming with, those are two marquee programs with marquee fan bases. And I feel like if you're not up to speed by that time, you're just going to get left in the dust potentially.
Well, and I hear, Mike, that they're talking about toward that end how they're going to schedule this stuff, because you're going to have a Super League at that point. So I know that one of the schedules, not this season, but next season, they've run a schedule with Oklahoma and Texas in it. That's already absolutely in the pipeline and ready to go. The question that we all have is, are they just going to take one team and put both those teams in the West, take two and shift them to the East, or are they going to go to this pod system? Because I think that's the next iteration of Southeastern Conference football. If you think about it, they go to that pod system, you could almost make a case. I mean, you could really think radically with that. You could do home and away games like they do in the NFL, have you a mini NFL, play those teams twice, play teams from the other conference a few less times, focus on the East, have like an NFC and an AFC. It would really, I kind of like that pod system. I don't know about playing somebody twice. I like the pod system from the perspective of it would allow you to play other teams. But yeah, you're right. So Tennessee's got to position themselves in the next couple of years, and I think I think they found a guy here that can give them some stability. Can he high-end win here, Mike? I don't know about that. I don't think he knows about that. But can he win enough, entertain enough, sell enough tickets, create enough buzz to stick around for a while? Sure, I think he can do that.
Now, speaking of Josh Heupel there, aside from the fact that he started that Joe Milton's coming out the season, that's something that's hard for me to overlook. But moving beyond that,
agreed.
Short yardage and goal line has been a huge issue. Now, it's year one. Maybe I'm being a little too harsh, but to win these tough games in the SEC, I think back to Pitt. I think to Purdue. There's probably a couple other. They are just not executing on the goal line like they should be. They're not executing in short yardage. Is that something that you got confidence can be fixed this offseason with so many players returning?
I don't know. And also, his mindset, I think, has to change. He's a guy that wants to play fast so much. Kenny Rogers once said, you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. At the end of some of these games and at the end of some of these halves, you got to use your timeouts.
Yeah.
And this is a guy that's averse to using timeouts. And when you're managing close games, in my mind, you got to squeeze every ounce of juice out of that lemon, or in this case, an orange that you possibly can. So I watch Tennessee sometimes and I go and talking to people around him, and his philosophy is, well, if I take time out, I'm giving you a time, substitute your players.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's fine. But you can't let 10 seconds go off a clock against Purdue.
Right.
Tennessee at the end of a bowl game, to your listener that doesn't follow Tennessee football, they have a chance to kick a field goal in regulation if they manage their time correctly. A closer field goal than the long shot they settled for, which had about zero chance of going through. But he does not take timeouts because he doesn't want the defense to substitute. And I, for the life of me, think that if he continues that, it's going to be difficult for him to function in close games. Because in this league, you've got to be pretty good in close games if you're going to win more than you lose after a 5-year period anyway.
Right, and they managed that against Kentucky, which is so kind of, to me, so baffling why they mismanaged it against Purdue. But that's something for them to work on in the offseason.
Good point. Yeah, good point.
What can you tell us about these new transfers they just added to the roster? Isaiah Newer, the Wyoming receiver, and Charlie Broder, local Tennessee kid, but he played for Central Florida last year. He's a tight end.
Yeah.
You hearing anything about these two guys?
Well, the Browder kid, it's funny. I talked to a guy in the grassroots area here locally named Will Goodwin, who has a program this kid was a basketball player.
Mm-hmm.
Will saw him, and he was in the Tri-Cities area, and they got him to come out and play some 7-on-7 football. This new 7-on-7 stuff, summer ball.
Right.
And he caught everything in sight. Caught absolutely everything in sight. And then he ended up over there at the Christ School. He picked the phone up, called Heath Schuler, because Will also knew Navy, and he ended up over there. So now those two guys are reuniting back here in Knoxville because Navy Schuler's is transferring in. Heath's son is transferring in from App State. Tennessee really thinks the world of that Browder kid. Now, he had several other offers to go to different places out of after he took a year to get bigger and all that stuff when he matriculated to Central Florida. There were other Division I suitors, including the Arizona States of the world, who wanted him to be an offensive lineman. But Will tells me that this kid has high-end receiving ability as a tight end. And then I got corroboration of that from a local guy. When you do what I do, and as long as I've done it, you just get to know these people. Mm-hmm. He texted me when Browder committed to Tennessee a couple of days ago. He texted me that this is a young man who had great hands in basketball. It's the way he put it. He said he also had a way in space of understanding. He called it spatial awareness as a big man in basketball. He said he would have been a nice basketball player, but he said he believes that this kid's going to be a very, very good pickup for Tennessee. As for the young man from Wyoming, if you would have said to me, I watch Wyoming football. If you would have said, I like their uniforms, always have, kind of a guilty pleasure of mine. They're on CBS Sports Network a bunch, and sometimes their games are on late at night, and they play like at odd hours, and I've just always loved watching Wyoming. They play in a really cool little stadium. That kid is going to be a great, not good, he's going to be a great player in this Josh Heupel offense. I predict he's extremely productive for Tennessee next year. And I predict he catches north of, let's just say it right now. I predict that kid catches at least 15 touchdown passes in their offense next year.
Now let me ask you about, of course, the team in the East there that plays Tennessee every year. The Kentucky Wildcats just won 10 games. Are you buying the offseason hype, or do you think this is just another case of Kentucky fans getting fired up and they're going to be disappointed in the fall?
Well, look, I've got a great amount of respect for Stoops and what he's built there. Different variations of Kentucky through the years, they've had some pretty good teams. Mm-hmm. But this guy here has built his, and if you look at the NFL, this guy here has built his program on solid lines.
Yeah.
This is not Hal Mummy's Kentucky. This is not Rich Brooks' Kentucky. I mean, that's a legit football team they put on the field year in and year out. And you pointed to the win over Kentucky for Tennessee. that might be Tennessee's best win of the year. I mean, that Kentucky team was really, really close to being very good. And what are you going to do with Georgia in your league, in your division, and you're at Kentucky? You're light years away from them. But going out and beating Florida like that, going out and beating LSU like that at the University of Kentucky, I mean, at a basketball school, which is what that is, which is what it's always going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I respect the heck out of that Stoops guy. And I've always found their fans, their football fans, to be sort of akin to our basketball fans. They're sort of long-suffering and underserved. So I guess long-term, look, I think for Tennessee to get back to being Tennessee, they've got to get back to beating Kentucky year in and year out, South Carolina year in and year out, Missouri year in and year out, and Vanderbilt year in and year out. I mean, those should be roll-out-of-bed wins. They're not just yet. They should be, but they're not just yet. The guy at South Carolina is really impressing me with the job he's done, Mike. That's, I mean, who's had a louder offseason than they've had?
Yeah, no one in the SEC to this point, that's for sure.
No.
And last thing for you, Tony, I really appreciate all your time because this is the game that all Tennessee fans, at least in the younger generation, got circled year in, year out. Florida, they come to Tennessee this year. And, I wouldn't hold it against you if you don't know the Florida schedule, but here it is.
Yeah.
They open against Utah, which just played in the Rose Bowl.
Wow.
And then they play Kentucky at home, but Kentucky should be pretty solid. And then they play South Florida. So we're looking at two big games for the Florida Gators with a new coach, and then they come to Neyland Stadium. I mean, this is a game I think I don't want to put too much pressure on Josh Heupel, but I feel like he's got to win this game.
In your mind, what's Florida's record coming out of that 3-game stretch?
1-2.
As we sit here. Yeah, I agree with that. I think they're 1-2. Because I first of all, I don't think they were very good last year, and I think it showed. And they've had a lot of losses, and he comes in under the gun, and I didn't like that hire. You know why I didn't like that hire? In his league, he had a superior team to most of the teams they played. And one of the things that we've gotten into fooling around with, and I'm not a gambler, okay, but I'm surrounded by them. So you have to follow the numbers when you're surrounded by the gamblers.
Right.
His teams always played down to their competition, always at his level where he just came from, Louisiana. If you do that in this league, and you do that with the Utah, you do that with the Kentucky, those teams will beat you.
Yeah.
So this guy's got to coach better than he did here recently at his last stop. So I'm inclined to agree with your 1-2 assessment of them. And if that happens, they'll be just laying there for Tennessee to take. But here's the thing I've learned, Mike. Fool me once, fool me twice. Well, that game's fooled me about 10 times now. So I'm a damn fool. I'm not even a fool anymore. I'm like an effing fool at this point. So if you think I'm coming on your podcast and predicting some bombastic Tennessee win over Florida, you're out of your damn mind. I've seen it, Mike. I'm sorry. I've lived here too long. I've seen it. I mean, we've seen every boob, buffoon, and loser known to mankind beat us here. In the last, they've had guys that couldn't coach. Period. End of sentence. Come in here and beat Tennessee. So whatever.
Hey, that's why you're the legend, Tony Basilio. I really appreciate your time. Again, check out TonyBasilio.com. Weekdays 11 to 1 on 99.7 FM, 1040 AM. I cannot thank you enough, Tony, for joining the show.
Well, yeah, and listen, and we blog every day. Our website is tclub.team. We call it tclub.team. Head over there every day. We put a blog up, and Mike, let me know when this is ready, and I'll go ahead and link it up there. And I always appreciate you when you, like I said, when you come on my program. I always appreciate you. You're knowledgeable, and I kind of take you as somebody. You sort of see me the same way. I take you as somebody that does not have an agenda. You just kind of enjoy. You just enjoy the Southeastern Conference and enjoy what we're doing here. and I greatly appreciate you giving me an opportunity here on your forum.
Absolutely. Well, take care, Tony. Have a good night, and I hope to talk to you soon.
All right, be blessed, man. Thanks.
All right, so just want to say thanks again to Tony Basilio joining the show. Man, what a legend that guy is. I do his show sometimes. He's been on the show a number of times. Really, really appreciate him taking the time to come and talk some SEC football with us. And then last but certainly not least, Ben Portnoy from the state. Really appreciate Ben taking some time here to talk about South Carolina and all the work Shane Beamer and company are doing there with the transfer portal. This is going to be potentially the surprise team, not only in the SEC, but the country next season, the way they have been able to upgrade their roster with 2 cycles of recruiting, 2 cycles of transfer, including a former Heisman Trophy contender, 5-star quarterback, the game's most important position. That can turn over your complete team in a single offseason. So credit Shane Beamer and company for managing to pull that off. And here's Ben Portnoy breaking it down with us. We're pleased to be joined by Ben Portnoy, who covers South Carolina for the state newspaper out of Columbia, South Carolina, of course. And you give him a follow at bportnoy15, which can be found in the show notes. Ben, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Mike, happy to be here. Really appreciate you reaching out and having me on.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's an exciting time to be sure to be a Gamecock fan after the Duke Mayo Bowl and just the bashing they gave the North Carolina Tar Heels. And, of course, that came after some big pickups in the transfer portal from Oklahoma. And now we got 4 new members of the Gamecocks. And that's really what I wanted to have you on about. You just wrote for the state here on Wednesday what South Carolina's transfer portal additions mean for the Gamecocks. Before we get into each individual addition here, how big do you think this transfer portal could be for South Carolina to kind of close the gap in the SEC East there?
Yeah, I think that, the lifeblood of programs is still going to be high school players. That's where you build depth. That's where you build, you can plug holes, but, you build that sort of large scale, I guess, for lack of a better term, organizational depth. And that's still a, 2 or 3 or even 4-year process. But I think what the transfer portal does, and especially at South Carolina, a place where, look, South Carolina's signed some elite recruits, Devion Clowney in 2008 or 2009. I can't remember the year now. But, they've signed 5-star guys in the past couple of years, just in Jordan Birch and Zach Pickens as well, that were, top 10 recruits in the country. So, they've signed some elite guys, but not at the same scale as, the Georgias, the Alabamas, the even Floridas, you could argue too, and schools like that. And so, for South Carolina, the transfer portal opens you up to be able to bring in guys who are, one, instant impact guys, but, guys that sort of fill that void of where, you may not have quite the same kind of star power that some of those other programs do. And it allows you to sort of, I guess on some level the playing field. And I think for South Carolina, it's been a really crucial part of what they've done. I mean, they brought in 9 or 10 transfers last year, and that, went a long way. I mean, about 6 to 7 of those guys ended up being impact players. One player didn't, Karan Prunty didn't end up playing at South Carolina last year. So I guess we can count it as 10 out of 9. So, a 6 out of 9 hit rate is one that I think most coaches in America will take. And, they're hoping for something similar with this group of guys.
Yeah, so that's something you also referenced in your recent article for the state, just South Carolina and their utilization of the transfer portal last year. What is it about Shane Beamer and company that they're so successful in landing these transfer portal guys? Is it playing in the SEC? Is it coming to a roster that could certainly use the help? What is it if you had to put your finger on it?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I mean, I think that, Shane Beamer is a guy that, connects well with players. I think that kind of permeates down on into his staff. There's some guys on the staff who I think are really, really good recruiters, and I think it goes a long way. And, South Carolina's in the process of, finishing with a top 20 or 25 class in the 2022 class. And, they feel pretty good about where they might be in the 2023 class as well next year, this time next year. So I think that they've got guys that connect well with prospects. I think that, it's still – look, South Carolina overachieved this year. They ended up 7-6, and that's a big deal. But at the same time, I think that this is still a roster that has needs and is still, like I said, kind of building that depth. And I think that, you can still sell playing time with guys, I think, pretty easily with this roster. And, South Carolina's gone out and gotten guys that I think will make a difference and quickly. And I think that, it's like I said, it's a combination of, playing time, it's roster construction, it's, the personalities, but I think just generally speaking also, I think people just trust Shane Beamer. I think, I was talking to Austin Stogner, who's the tight end from Oklahoma, who's transferring to South Carolina, I guess a week or two ago. And he was saying that, he said straight up, he's like, there's nobody in college football I trust more than Shane Beamer. And like, to hear guys say that, I mean, I know there's a lot of, cliches and whatever else you want to hear in college football, but like you hear that from more than just one person. And I think that goes a long way, and it tells you how people view a guy like Shane Beamer in the business and in the college world of college football. And I think that, that translates with recruits.
Well, yeah, so you talk about Stogner. I'm glad you did, because I wanted to ask you about him and Spencer Rattler, of course. How much buzz and juice did that give this program? And, I know fans, it's short for fanatics, but I mean, my goodness, I'm hearing some Gamecocks thinking, this could be their rise in the SEC, and maybe they'll be the ones that surprise everybody and make it to Atlanta next season. And it's going to come, if that comes, it's going to be because Spencer Rattler is just an elite player. So, how much buzz and momentum does that give the program with just those two additions?
That's the thing that's so crazy is that, if you're South Carolina, I mean, folks will circle the 3-year stretch where Spurrier won 11 games in 3 straight years. But outside of that, I mean, South Carolina does not have much, if any, of a football history. And, folks here might argue otherwise. But the reality is South Carolina's been a pretty middle of the pack to sort of end of the pack program for most of its existence. And I know that's tough, and I know it's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of fans. But I think that, because of that, South Carolina hasn't been able to attract a guy like Spencer Rattler. Like, I forget the exact number, but it's been, 40 plus years since I think South Carolina's had a quarterback that was drafted in the NFL and also threw a pass. And I think that, you can't win in this day and age without an elite quarterback. And I think, Spencer Rattler gives South Carolina exactly that. Stogner is going to be a part of that passing game as well. And I think that, to sign a guy like Spencer Rattler, who, I guess 12 months ago, if that, was a Heisman front runner was a preseason Heisman front runner for the 2021 season, 6 months ago, even, or 5 months ago. And so I think that, it gives South Carolina some instant credibility. I think it gives them some national attention that they wouldn't get otherwise. And, this isn't, like I said, not a program that generally operates in the national, under the national microscope. And I think that, if you're South Carolina, one, that's something to relish. But, whether Spencer Rattler plays well or whether Spencer Rattler plays terribly, like, people are going to watch. And I think that matters, and that matters as far as moving forward as well.
Now, shifting gears to the 4 guys South Carolina just added here, what can you tell us about starting with the running back Christian Beal-Smith from Wake Forest? What do you know about him?
Yeah, South Carolina's in an interesting spot at running back just because they do lose Kevin Harris and they also lose Zaquandre White, who are their 2 leading rushers a year ago. And, those guys weren't super, super consistent throughout the year. I mean, Kevin Harris led the SEC in rushing 2 years ago, but had off-season back surgery and never really, frankly, quite looked right. Went for 180 yards in the bowl game, but that was sort of maybe one of 2, maybe 3 games this year that you really looked and thought, okay, Kevin Harris looks like himself. And, Zaquandre White didn't play for 3 straight games at one point. We never really got an explanation why, but, he didn't get a recorded carry for 3 straight games and then all of a sudden kind of tore it up at the back end half of the season. So, it's a little bit of an interesting situation, but you bring in a guy like Christian Beal-Smith, who's, led Wake Forest in rushing, if I'm not mistaken, the last 2 years and this past year as well, for a team that won 11 games in the ACC last year. I mean, that's the kind of guy that you can kind of plug and play. I think that he's a nice complement. He's a physical complement to what South Carolina does have in Marshawn Lloyd and Juju McDowell, who are 2 kind of, more speedy guys. They'll make you miss, that kind of thing. And I think that, Christian Beal-Smith's a nice complement to what those guys can do. And I think it gives South Carolina, again, for the third year in a row, a couple of running backs that they feel really good about.
Now, what about the receiver from James Madison, Antoine Wells? I know he's only played 2 years, but his name's all over the record book down there. Do you think he can make an impact next season?
Yeah, he's one that I think is really interesting. And I think if, there's one guy in this group that might pop a little bit, isn't on radars right now necessarily, but might be at the end of the next year, it's Antoine Wells. I mean, this is a guy that put up crazy numbers at James Madison. I mean, had over 1,200 yards receiving last year, had 15 touchdowns. I mean, I think he's, second in receiving yards, second in touchdowns, and third in in receptions in school history last year, set single season marks. So, it's just, he's all over the record books, only played like one full season. And, to be able to put up those kinds of numbers over just that short of time is pretty impressive. I talked to his former quarterback the other night, Cole Johnson, who, finished pretty high up there as far as records go, at James Madison. And I think that, he basically said, like, in the locker room, we used to joke that this guy was basically Jamar Chase. And, Tino Sunseri, who is the brother of Vinny Sunseri, who worked at Alabama for a long time, has worked at Alabama for a long time. And Tino worked at Alabama a little bit as well. At least what Cole said that Tino said that this guy's every bit as good as, Henry Ruggs and Devontae Smith and those guys that were at Alabama, and John Mechie and those guys that were at Alabama in recent years. So, praise is one thing, but that's some pretty serious praise for a guy who's played basically 1.5 seasons of college football. And I think that, South Carolina needed help at receiver. And if there's one guy to circle and think, hey, this dude might be a stud, like that's the one, I think, out of this group.
Now, what about the defensive lineman, Terrell Dawkins, NC State, proud tradition of producing defensive linemen. What do you see in him?
Yeah, I think that he's a nice add. I think that South Carolina had some issues stopping the run last year. I think that he helps with that on some level. They do bring back Jordan Strawn, Zach Pickens, Jordan Birch, a couple of guys I mentioned earlier, to a group that was really, really elite this year. They do lose J.J. Eningbari, and he's a guy that should be a pretty high, if not a first-round pick, a second or third-round pick at the worst. Mm-hmm. So they've got a piece to replace there. They lose Aaron Sterling on the other side as well at defensive end. So, they've got some pieces to replace there, but I think that, Terrell Dawkins is a guy that fits right in quickly. I think he's a guy that, dealt with some injuries last year, but had a really, really good freshman year at NC State. But I think fills a position of need and is a proven commodity. I think that's the thing that you get with all of these guys is that, short of Antoine Wells, who I guess you could argue did it at the FCS level, so you don't necessarily know how that's going to translate. Like all of the guys that South Carolina is bringing in, and I think this was, a large point of what I was writing the other day, is just that, they're bringing in guys who have proven track records at Power 5 schools, and that's hard to do. One, and two, it's something that South Carolina needed. So they're not necessarily, just plugging holes. I mean, they're filling holes, but they're also sort of upgrading at some positions as well, and that goes a long way.
Yeah, and last but not least here, Devontae Reed from Central Michigan, who he actually played 2 SEC teams last year, so he's not going to be any stranger to playing in the league.
Yeah, definitely, and he's a guy that I think folks here are really excited about. I mean, he's got 1 year left to play, if I'm not mistaken, and had over 200 tackles at Central Michigan. I mean, that's a lot. That's a guy who's flying around the defense, and it's a good Central Michigan team. Obviously, it sort of had a little bit of a spark under Jim McElwain and got a little bit better. And that's a fit that I think South Carolina needed. I mean, the Gamecocks lose Jalen Foster, an All-American at safety, and I think the thought is that Devontae Reed can slide right into that spot alongside R.J. Roderick, who's announced that he's coming back as well. So, you throw in those two guys with Tyrese Ross, who's a Washington State transfer from last year, who didn't totally crack the lineup this year, but, is a guy that I think is right there on the surface that could be, a nice complementary piece as well next year. So, I mean, South Carolina's in a position where they've got a couple of safeties who could be really, really good, and I think Devontae Reed is every bit that. I mean, he's played a ton of games. He's, made a ton of tackles, and I think that's what South Carolina was hoping for there.
And last thing for you, Ben, I just wanted to get your thoughts on this because I know this is going to be a topic there in Columbia all off season. But of course, you just added Spencer Rattler from Oklahoma. The Gamecocks just signed 2 4-star quarterbacks, Tanner Bailey and Braden Davis. What do you think they're going to do now with DeCarrion Joyner, MVP of the Duke Mayo Bowl, and don't forget Luke Doty, who he had a ton of buzz before he got injured. So South Carolina went from having to start a GA under center to now having 5 talented players back here. How do you think that all shapes out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that DeCarrion Joyner will still get a little bit of a run at quarterback, probably as a change of pace type deal, but I don't see that sticking. My guess is he'll be a receiver next year, and he'll be back at receiver, and that was kind of a 1-game deal. Luke Doty's a guy that honestly, like, I actually think that the Spencer Rattler coming in ends up being the perfect situation for Luke Doty, because I think the thing that people forget is that, Luke spent a couple of games at receiver his freshman year. He played some quarterback, but was thrown into a kind of a crappy situation with sort of the end of Muschamp and, guys leaving and, an offensive line that wasn't quite there and just a lot of issues there. And I think that when you look at that kind of thing, this year he was injured most of the year as well, had the foot injury that held him out for the start of the season and then ended his season a few weeks into it. So I think that, the thing that Luke Doty's never really had at the college level, and I think the other thing people forget too, is like he only played quarterback full time I guess his last 2 years of high school, if not his last 3, but he was only a full-time quarterback briefly in high school. And so Luke hasn't ever really had that year to just strictly develop. And I think it's something that would go a long way. And I think he's still a really talented kid. He's a really athletic kid, can throw the ball better than I think most people realize. But he's a guy that I think can be a really good player. I just think that he needs a little bit of time. And I don't, calling him a project's probably, that probably comes off like a poor connotation or whatever you want to call it, especially, when it relates to quarterbacks. But I don't think it's that far off. I mean, he's a guy that I think can be really good. And I think being able to sit behind Spencer Rattler is, something that would be really good for him. Now, how the rest of the quarterback room shakes out, we'll see. I mean, I think that anytime you have that many quarterbacks in this day and age, you might lose someone here or there. Colton Gauthier is also there as a 3-star guy. He was the highest rated guy in the class last year. In between Muschamp and Beamer. So, how do you keep all those guys on board? I don't know. I mean, is it fair to assume that there's probably some attrition? Yeah, that's, sort of the nature of the beast at this time. But, right now, South Carolina's in a really good spot. I mean, at this point last year, in early January, South Carolina was down to 2 scholarship quarterbacks. And they ended up they had 4 different quarterbacks win games for them this year. And I think South Carolina sent out some notes today, and I think that's only the second time in history that's ever happened, at least that's been recorded. So it was kind of a mess under center this year, but I think they're in a really good spot right now, and I think they've got some guys that they really like. And Braden Davis and Tanner Bailey, obviously freshmen, gives them a chance to redshirt and kind of get on campus and get going. But I think South Carolina feels really good about where they're at quarterback right now.
All right, he's Ben Portnoy. Give him a follow at bportnoy15. Covers South Carolina for the state newspaper. Thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you having me on. This was really fun.
All right, so thanks again, Ben, for joining the show. And you can find the article that we referenced, his latest article for the state. Put that in the show notes. Give him a follow. Give Tony B a follow. 2 of the best in the SEC. Yeah, I cannot thank them enough for joining the show. But hey, that's going to do it for this episode. And as always, if you haven't done so already, I know we're going into the off season. Things are slowing down. I'm working overtime here to get daily episodes out that are still entertaining. I don't know how much longer we're going to be doing it this way, but hey, this is my only source of income now. So I got to keep pumping out the content. Very appreciative for these guests for coming on the line. But I'd be very appreciative of all of you if you give me a 5-star written review on the Apple Podcast app, and we'll give you a beer koozie free of charge just for doing that. Just mail those on over to that secpodcast@gmail.com. That is also in the show notes. And now finally, for all these people that reach out to us and say, hey, I don't got an Apple product, how can I help the show? Head on over to Spotify. That's free, and we're looking for 5-star reviews on the Spotify app. You do that, again, send that on over to that secpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll send you a beer koozie free of charge. We got all 14 SEC teams represented. So that's just our way of saying thanks for those reviews, because we really do appreciate each and every one of those. That really helps the show grow. But that's enough of me begging and pleading here. I'm going to cut this thing off, and we'll catch you on the next one.